Mr. Borrowing,
Present.
Mr. Jinks,
Here.
Ms. Nichols, Chairman Orris,
Here.
Mr. Slocum,
Here.
Mr. Talbot,
There she is.
Here.
Mr. Veliver,
Here.
Mr. Walsh,
Here.
and Ms. Nichols.
I'm here, sorry. It's those phone calls. An awful lot of people who have a lot to say about this meeting. So.
Well, you have a chair, you have a quorum of the Budget Committee and the Council.
Great, thank you. If we could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
and to the
republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under
God,
God, indivisible,
with
with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Budget Chair, Mr. Borrowing.
All right, thank you, Mayor Orris. Good evening, everybody, for, I believe, the 9th and final budget workshop. This is a workshop meeting. I have to say thank you all for your patience. This is my 17th budget, and it has been the most unusual and the most difficult. And really, there's no winners, but at the same time, as long as we try hard to limit the tax that we have to charge the residents and continue to offer as much as we can in services, I think we come out as best we can in this situation. And I think that's what we're doing here tonight, finalizing. So I want to bring to your attention what Town Manager Kimball sent out a few minutes ago, not the hour-long ago one, but the recent one about 10 or 15 minutes ago, I think. It's the mill rate calculator and spreadsheet. It takes into account some new information. I know you were all sent an email about an hour ago with some new information from our insurance carrier about some savings that we have. And it distributes that savings. It's $290,000 in savings. What it does with that savings, it distributes $136,000 of that to lessen the amount of fund balance we need to be spending this year. And it takes $56,000 to get us to an actual zero mill rate increase, because we were slightly off, if you remember, from last Wednesday's mill rate calculator. And then it takes $100,000 and puts it back to the Board of Ed, so we lessen the amount. Well, it increases their increase to about $1.25 million. So basically, what we have is a level, flat general town government budget to consider and review tonight in the document that the town manager sent out. It's a level, flat general town government budget, 0.2% increase, $70,000. It's an education budget with a 1.7% increase of $1.25 million. It's a debt service increase expense of $941,000 with $616,000 put in there for future years through conversation with Councilman Talbot's thoughts last Tuesday. And it funds capital non-recurring at $1 million and contingency at 125. All told together, it's an increase in spending of $1.8 million that has no mill increase and no tax increase to the residents in town. But I do believe that as we look through this, even though there's $1.2 million in reduction in the expenditures on the town side and the Board of Ed side of over $1 million, it does allow us to keep our services very close to what they had been through efficiencies and through savings and through doing the same amount of work with less in many cases, which is what businesses are doing all over the country, all over our town, all over the state. And I think this is what I'd like to have open our discussion on and see where everybody comes in on what the town manager passed out later this afternoon that I asked him to prepare.
Dave?
Yes, Mayor Orris.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that quick summary. And I think, we're all pretty much in agreement that we're looking to pursue that zero mill rate increase for this current operating budget that we're deliberating right now. But we all have some very large concerns about the following year's operating budget as well. And that's really what we've been trying to wrestle with, is how we get that zero mill rate, and then obviously, put some money aside so that we can defer some of the kind of regurgitation of the one-time uses of savings from the COVID, plus some additional expenses we're going to be incurring with debt service increases, which are substantial in the next year, as well as the possibility of some significant reductions in funding from the state, which none of us have our crystal ball on. But if I was to bet today, I would bet that not this budget that we're deliberating on, but the following one, we're apt to see some changes in funding from the state in light of everything that we're hearing and seeing going on. So I just want to certainly say that I'm supportive generally of what we're seeing in front of us at this point. I'm comfortable reducing the cut that we're making to the Board of Ed by that $100,000 and going from 1,150,000 to 1,050,000. What I really want to see is the use of these excess funds that we've been able to determine. I know Mr. Talbot referenced about 600,000 in one-time savings from the COVID. We also have some fund balance amounts of like $400,000. Obviously, the savings in heart and hypertension. And then, of course, the water pollution control, $100,000 we talked about. It seems very prudent to me that we use those funds in preparation of the almost $3 million hole that we know we're going to be starting in with the following budget from this year's. I know I've seen some people on Facebook concerned that, well, you're using savings and then you're asking for further cuts. Well, yeah, the problem is when we use these one-time savings, first and foremost, what are we supposed to do with the savings? Just spend them frivolously because we budgeted the money? I don't think anyone in this environment is supporting that. So certainly we're going to be taking those savings and using them in this budget. But the big problem with using one-time savings is you get the rebound effect. And I know you all know this, but I'm stating it for the public's edification because there seems to be some confusion from some members of the public that we're double dipping, if you will, against certain members of our budget. And that is not the case. What we're trying to do is minimize the impacts to the taxpayers based on what we see coming down the pike relative to funding and additional expenses and potential revenue problems we may have. And it's really minimizing the tax impact to our taxpayers. And I think this does that. I'd like to see the monies that are above and beyond the amount needed for this year's zero mill rate increase be put in some form of an account that gives us the most flexibility. I don't really care what we do with it. You can call it fund balance. You can call it a variety of places. I know we've got it in debt service. But Jim, maybe you can opine to this. We are all going to be dealing with this next budget next year. I mean, we're before an election, so, you know, unless something happens, we'll all be here doing this same thing one more time. And I think we all recognize what we do know is that we don't know a lot about next budget. And so I just think it's important that we do find those extra savings, we put them aside, and we put them aside in places that we can allocate them as a group as we decide to use them next year. So that's really my only other comment relative to kind of these excess savings that we're using to kind of smooth the problems we see coming not only this year, but the year beyond. Because if we use all of the savings this year, folks, apply it all, use our fund balance that we have in excess and everything else, we'll have a $3 to $3.5 million spike in what we need to make up in the next budget without even dealing with labor increases and other potential expense increases and potential cuts from the state. So I just, the public needs to know that we're not looking at this in a vacuum and that we're not being piggish in where we're trying to find savings. This is being done in an effort to be fiscally prudent in a way that minimizes the impacts on the backs of our taxpayers in light of this unprecedented pandemic that we're all dealing with right now. Nothing more. There's nothing personal in our intentions on this budget. There is nothing other than doing what we all believe is in the best interest of our taxpayers. So I have a fire alarm going off in my house. So with that, I'm going to mute so I don't disturb the meeting and see if my house is burning down.
Good luck.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, yeah,
Yes.
I would certainly echo Rob's statement, but also I think clearly, I think I can speak for everyone in a manner of direction I think this council early on wanted to take. We recognized it was really an unprecedented situation. We didn't know where we would go with it. We didn't necessarily state the goal of a zero mill increase like absolutely, but we knew we could not really bear down intensely on the burden of the taxpayer. And I think that was universally understood. And as the numbers unfolded, I think we saw there was a means to an end that could get us there without harming what goes on in the classroom, what goes on in town hall, what goes on our public thoroughfares. I guess the other thing that I would say I felt, and maybe it's a misread on my part, but I really did feel we were getting a commitment and a sense from our town staff and employees. I honestly think they recognize the bind the town is in. They certainly recognize that there could be some sacrifices from their venues, but I think they also recognize there's sacrifices from the public's venues, and I really think we're doing the right and responsible thing, and we're doing no harm. And I know that's the doctor's rule of order, and we're no doctors, but we are in a place we're supposed to create the right prescription for the town's healthy well-being. And if it's financial well-being, then I think we've written the right prescription with some unknowns with the outcome. And therein ends my statement. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Slocum. Are there other council member comments or questions? Mrs. Nichols? We can't hear you.
No, excuse
There
me.
you go.
I have a dog that was scared by Rob's fire alarm.
Oh,
I apologize that he's in this mix here. I agree with him. I think we've tried very hard to look to the future. I know some of the comments I've read have been that we're not looking to the future. I think I would take issue with that, because I think basically what we've been working for is to look to the future. None of us, even in our own personal budgets, are comfortable at not being prepared in the event that some emergency comes up in our own financial situation. And that's what we're trying to do here with this budget. I believe that everybody's working hard to make sure that we can deliver the right services, the services our taxpayers expect, respecting their budgets. I am concerned we've had some issues about where the savings should be put, and I would probably lean toward the advice from Jim Jascott and from Sean as to what account that should be put in, because I want it to be saved specifically to help, as Rob said, smooth out the issues that are coming. And often whatever place we put some of these monies dictates that it only be used for a specific project. I would like to have it available because, as Rob said, we have no idea what's coming down the pike for us. And to restrict it in one particular dedicated account concerns me. So I guess I would go to Jim and Sean and say, where is the best place to put this money away other than a nice black sock in the drawer somewhere? What do we do with it? Where is the best place to put it? I know we talked about putting it in debt service. We're going to have a lot of that. I know we may need it for some other operating expenses that we have next year that we don't know about. Where's the best place for it? So that's where I'm at. Save it now so we have it to spend, but where do we put it?
Sean, do you want to give your thoughts on that first?
Sure. I mean, I think, I think that knowing what we have coming in the next few years, the debt service reserve fund is certainly a prudent place to put it. The council always maintains the ability to reappropriate, frankly, from any of these reserve accounts across to others. So, I think we've talked about even, the heart and hypertension fund that we've used, whether we had additional appropriations in there, we still may have more that we need there. That could always be reappropriated in the middle of the year if needed. But again, I think between, when you have a purpose that you want to spend the money for, like debt service, if it's, again, in our case, we have that in our very near future in the next couple of years. It's certainly appropriate to put it in a specific fund like that, but otherwise that's what the undesignated portion of the fund balance is there for. And again, the Cheshire has been very, diligent and careful in its use of fund balance over the years, and has built it up very carefully and in many ways for the flexibility that we need in times like this. So I think what we've proposed in the spreadsheet that was distributed earlier is certainly appropriate. And then again, I guess with the caveat that as the appropriating authority, the council certainly has the ability within a year. And I wouldn't be surprised if this year, I come to you with some potential adjustments mid-year if needed, if we need to course correct or have additional expenditures that we can't anticipate right now. That's also what those reserve funds are for if needed and on a case-by-case basis. So that gives us the most flexibility, and as long as we all kind of stay on the same page with those items, then we'll be in good shape.
Does that answer your concern?
It does. And I think it sounds from an accounting process, it's simpler to keep it in that, as you've listed it right there. And makes it easier to access. And you're right, the ability to do that. So that answers my question. As Rob's house burned down,
Peter, Councilman Talbot.
Thank you, Mr. Borrowy. I think it's a good sign that Rob is back without a fire extinguisher or
Yeah.
water. So we'll take that as a good sign that the fire alarm was just a precaution. So I'm comfortable with the distribution as outlined. I will go back to something I said the other night, that I would like to see us keep the dollar amount of the Board of Education increase where it was. And I don't know if, Sean, there's any way to do that without, in other words, where the 100,000 that you're putting towards that is, and then go to the mill rate calculator. So the other night, when you looked at town government and Board of Education, what the increase was, down just a little bit. Yep. So those columns, the dollar increase, was it 1.137415? And I'm just wondering if there's a way we can give the Board of Education the credit for that 100,000 without showing it as an increase of the 1.237, because that becomes that 74,593,926 becomes your bottom line, starting point for next fiscal year. So I'd like them to get the $100,000, but I'd like to see it somewhere else besides increase. And maybe I'm being, asking for stuff that can't happen.
Well, Peter, I wonder if an answer to your question is the Board of Education funding for CNR, not within our $1 million CNR budget, but they have their own CNR budget, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sean. Is that a possible placeholder?
They have their own CNR budget, but the appropriation that Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but the appropriation to fund CNR is made jointly in this line here, the $1 million.
I thought they had a fund that we have replenished in the past to bring it up to 350 or whatever. Tell me I'm mistaken. That's okay. I can accept it. But I thought.
No, they do have capital non-recurring funds, but the contributions to those appropriations all come from this one source.
So they come. Okay. So in an answer to Peter's commentary, would an increase in CNR sort of fulfill an objective like that, Mr. Talbot?
It would. I mean, I have no problem putting an extra 100,000 into CNR, making it back to 1.1, with the understanding that 100,000 is for the express purpose of the Board of Education.
Now, is that a curveball for anybody?
I just wonder I'm not sure that I understand the rationale between not making it a direct allowable expenditure on their part.
Well,
I think if I could, go ahead, Peter.
No, all I was going to say was, David, if we put it in that, in the education line under FY21,
Mm-hmm.
and we do it that way, and that becomes 74,593 instead of 74,493, you've automatically tacked that 100,000 onto next year's starting point.
Well, the theory
I
of
mean-
zero-based budgeting is that that's not necessarily the case. And I'm sure that the state is not going to have penalties, just as some of the valley towns did not get penalties for not increasing from one year to the next.
It's not, yeah, I don't have the problem with increasing, but you can never go backwards.
Well, that's what I meant. One or two of the valley towns, I think it was Shelton, ended up going backwards a little bit, and they didn't get a penalty for that. They had an explanation, and I suspect next year there certainly would be a lot of explanation. Although I do understand that becomes a new base, and you're concerned about that. I guess I'm
the only
we just
alternative.
differ. I'm not concerned about it, but becoming the
Just
base.
to answer, Peter, your question, the only alternative that that we had discussed in recent weeks really is that non-lapsing fund, because that is moving money out of the general fund altogether, and then it's there for that year. But then the base would have to, the base from the general fund standpoint would be lower, but then it's not a recurring amount of money, just a one-time thing.
I mean, let's put it this way. It's not a hill I'm willing to die on, but I would like to see that if at all possible. And if I'm the only one that feels that way, then it's not gonna break my heart.
Well, let's hear some other comments from council members.
Well, I
then.
was I was only looking, and I welcome those other comments, but I was only looking for, in my comment, a suggestion that sort of made it work both ways, and I'm not sure if it does. And I guess, is there an answer to that question, Sean?
I think I don't think it can work both ways, that the way you're describing it, because you can't appropriate it to capital non-recurring, but then say that 100,000 is really for Board of Ed operating expenses without. I think you need an inter-fund transfer, right? So I think it'd be kind of a roundabout way to get it, and then ultimately their appropriation would be increased once you make it anyway, even if it was mid-year. So it wouldn't have,
it's
I think, the
impractical.
intended
It's very
effect.
complicated. Okay, thank you.
So if it was in the fund
think.
if it was in the fund that we started from the motion at the last council meeting, and we allocated 100,000 to that fund, would they be able to spend it this year without having it show up here?
From the non-lapsing fund?
Yeah.
I would
Would they
say
be able
yes.
to spend it? Yes, next year in fiscal 21, yes, that's correct.
So we had thought about giving them $200,000 of the money that they saved this year for COVID expenses they expect to have in July to catch up for some issues. And what you're proposing is that we make that 300,000 and we lower the appropriated amount for next year.
Yeah, so that would show up as the 74,490, whatever, 493. And and we put three. I mean, just because we're saying we're putting 200,000 into that account for them to spend for COVID expenses or whatever we're calling it. I mean, the Board of Ed can spend their money any way they want. So
But they need our approval.
Designated as COVID, but if they wanted to spend it somewhere else, they could theoretically.
With our approval, because the way we wrote up that motion last week was that they had to have our approval to get that access to that money.
It seems as though if we're talking about it now, it's pretty much a done deal. I mean, honestly, we're sort of acquiescing if we go that route.
Right. So.
Well, I would
back in. I'm sorry. Is there anybody else? Because I'm sorry I had to jump out. I had every alarm in my house was going off, and we had a little kitchen problem.
Well, everything all right?
Everything's solved, yeah, thankfully. But in any event, I missed a number of things, but I think I got the gist of it. But Dave, to kind of follow up on what the answer you just gave to Peter, we have to allocate or approve the amount of the allocation that we're giving them. But once they have it, they can spend it any way they want.
I believe they have to ask us for the actual ability to spend it. That's what one of the 8 or 10 items in that motion was, I believe. And
I don't believe so. Maybe we need to get clarification. It's my understanding that if for this year, the saving carryover, if we could plop 100% of those savings into that 2% account, or we can plop some portion of that savings into that account. But once we do it, it is theirs to be spent the way they choose to. We can't determine how they spend it. Now, we can terminate the account the way it's written and
Right.
draw the money back in, but I'm not sure we'd be doing that midstream. So I think I differ from the way you're interpreting it. So I'd love to get a clarification.
Yeah. Sean, is that what you're looking up?
Yeah, let me pull it up. It'll
That's
just
it.
take me a minute though.
Looked like you were
Okay,
looking for
hold on.
something. Yep. I would trust the mayor's judgment to
Essentially
be
what
right.
Peter is
but-
saying is, Peter, you want to maintain the higher cut to the Board of Ed of $1,150,000 so that we provide for a lower starting point at next year's budget, but you're willing to make up that additional $100,000 potentially by putting it into the 2% carryover that we're talking about from this year's COVID savings. Is that accurate?
Yes. I
Okay.
want them to be able to spend it, but I don't want to increase the threshold
Okay.
when we're looking at future budget years.
Now, remember, the Board of Ed is going to make a recommendation to us as to what they're looking to carry over. Now, they may make a request for 100% of the savings. I think we've talked about it and said that in reality, a lot of that should sit in fund balance and some of it should go because we know it's earmarked for certain expenses. Is that correct?
Oh, Sean, we can't hear you.
Where is Sean? I lost him. Oh, there he is.
I see him.
No, I'm
there,
here. I
but-
was talking to Arnett on the phone to try to
okay.
pull up that motion language. But I believe Rob is correct though with his description of the motion that once, while it takes joint approval to set, while it takes the council approval to set it up, once it's set up and the deposit is made with council approval, the actual spending of it, they don't come back each time they need to authorize the spending throughout the year after the appropriation into the fund is approved by council. Hope that clarifies.
Okay. Well, what's the pleasure of the
That's my
council?
I just have a question, just one question. If in
Sure.
fact, so obviously if there's $300 that's basically been encumbered, that limits it to the budget year it's encumbered?
No, Tim, my understanding.
Fine.
Well, wait a minute. So they could carry those funds over based on our approval. Let's say we give them $300,000. That money would be used for the upcoming budget. They would have to use it in that upcoming budget. They could not carry it forward beyond that upcoming budget without
Fine.
our further approval.
Fine. Okay.
That's correct. Without council approval at the end. Right.
Yeah, that was
Oh,
my
there we are.
understanding as
Okay.
well.
Okay. So
The account must be used for educational. Can I exceed 2%? Any rollover? Well, approved. Okay. Rob, you're right.
I think that's reasonable.
I'm fine with that. I don't know what others might comment, but
That I'm fine with that. That makes sense to me.
yeah. So what we're doing is we'll increase the amount that we will allow them to carry over. We've talked about 200,000. Now we'll make it 300,000, and we'll give them $1.1 million more for next year instead of $1.2 million, knowing that this other 100,000 is there.
Right.
So it still gives them
They're
$1.2
getting the
million
same amount
more
of
for
money.
next year. Right. It's just slightly different because it keeps the base lower for next year, which could be an issue of difficulty to get around.
And
Right.
and David, you can actually make the case. You said it gives them the 1.2. It actually gives them an increase of 1.4 because there's already the 200,000 in there.
Right.
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 So their increase over the prior fiscal year is 1.437415.
Yep. Nope. That's exactly right.
100,000 of that is going to be in this carryover account.
Mhm.
Well,
Yep.
the only problem, and I don't think it is a problem because I don't envision we would be supporting putting 100% of those savings into that account. But let's assume the Board of Ed requested 100% of the current operating savings go into that account. We wouldn't be able to add another $100,000 to it.
No, and we need some of that savings to lapse into, at the end of the year, to lapse into fund
I
balance.
know
because
that, but
that's-
Dave, the only thing I'm saying is
you
I
know.
think we need to make sure that we discuss what our expectations are with the Board of Ed, because I think the Board of Ed in their own mind is thinking that that money is, 100% of those savings is just going to go into that 2% account. It's going to sit there to be used for this upcoming budget. I don't know that we've had a conversation about, yes, they're going to get the use of it, but in the meantime, a good portion of it needs to come into the general fund. I'm just saying.
All right, so we need to have a conversation to
The
make sure that we're
resolution
clear.
calls for the Board of Ed to request and us
Mm-hmm.
to approve the amount. So they may have a request for 100%. I'm just saying we need to have a dialogue with them as to what the expectation is and how we're going to be doing it. Because the net result is, I agree with Peter, the Board of Ed is getting exactly what we talked about in the beginning. We're just slicing and dicing how we're getting there a little bit different. What I want to be abundantly clear, though, is to the public and to the Board of Ed that they recognize what we're doing, and that tomorrow we don't hear, oh, the town council cut 1.15 million from the budget, but yet nobody talks about the carryover accounts and the extra $200,000 and everything else we're talking about, because it's not an apples to apples comparison. As Mr. Talbot just said, we're actually getting $1.4 million of an increase.
Yep.
Not what it shows here is 1.2.
I
Right.
do think, Rob, it's been pretty clear in our meetings that we're well out of executive session, that we were talking $200,000 and it was for special ed.
Mhm.
I don't think any of this has been in the dark, or it's just a new illumination. I think it's been widely illuminated, and I know those guys watch at home. But again, if it requires something more strident and we have to just word it and get it written so that they completely understand, because that's what we understand ultimately in our vote, then we should do it.
Yeah. I agree. We need to have a conversation to make sure that we're clear. And I also agree that the Board of Ed has been part of our discussions when we've talked about this. But I do see Sean there clicking on boxes that we have to make an adjustment to. We have to make the use of additional surplus applied from the Board of Ed from this year to next year down to $947,600 in order to accomplish that.
Right.
And
so I was
then the
gonna
other
start doing
300
that.
is just left there. Yep.
Yep, just kind of based on where the conversation was going. So changing it on the revenue page. Jim, jump in if I'm getting any of these wrong. This number now really isn't 10 either, because the 300 is kind of not on the spreadsheet, right? That altogether, it's a separate from the general fund. And then once you've done that, you can go to the expenditures and take out the adjustment to the Board of Ed.
Yep.
And unless I've missed anything else.
Yeah, it's back to 13,000.
Right. The mill rate's back to 0. It's back to 13,000, and the amount of quote
Oh,
unquote surplus
it's
applied
actually
is less by
13,000 to the good, Sean.
Yeah. That's better
is,
than the
yeah,
56 to
and
the bad.
Jim is going to elucidate that just a little bit in a bit. It has to do with some rounding that we have with our mill rate, but we can speak to that very briefly in a minute. But yes, so I think that has the desired effect, and then the education budget is now up. Did that change?
Yeah, it did change. It did. It was a 593 and now it's 493.
Yes.
And effectively,
you.
the Board
That's
of Ed
right.
is going to get $1.5 million more next year because you have to add the $300,000 to that. And that's significant money. I mean, I think we have addressed the concerns that we've been getting emails about over the last few days. And we're not cutting the Board of Ed. We're giving them $1.5 million more. That should be close enough with some of my, unofficial conversations and looking at numbers, hopefully close enough to allow them to have the spending power to do most of what it is that they wanted to do and provide the services that they want to provide to our citizens. But we'll know for sure once the Board of Ed takes the number that's available to them and starts putting it in their line items next month after it's approved by us.
And we have 3 members that we haven't heard from. I'd be interested to hear from the.
I would as well.
Rob had his hand up. So
okay, there we go.
There we go.
Rob, did you
No, I'm okay with waiting. I'm certainly not looking to get in front of everyone else. I've got plenty of your time.
All right. Well, does anybody else? Okay, Councilman Oliver?
Yeah, thank you. And I understand where we're going with this, and in the end we get to the same number. I mean, I guess part of me is a little, I guess it's all sort of how we slice and dice it, and I think in the end that number, I'm not too worried about getting to that $100,000 higher on the starting point. I mean, that's in the end that's sort of a drop in the bucket for a $74 million budget, but who knows, when next year when we're in the same position, we may be looking for any benefit we can get. So my only concern with it is, in the end, I think as long as we're trying to meet the goals of the Board of Education, that's great. And I think it's something that we've really striven hard to get to with this budget. One of the things that I think, I mean, I wish we could, if we had just added that number back and maybe just added the appearance of what we're doing, it's easier for people to understand what we're giving back to the Board of Education, what we're doing for the Board of Education as far as the number goes. It's very difficult, I think, for people to understand, okay, we're giving them $100,000 in this account, which is going to lead to this. In the end, it's real. People are only going to look for one number. What's the Board of Ed number? That's all people are really going to look at. And so in the end, I kind of would like to have it just be simple and put it in that Board of Education budget and give it to them that way. But in the end, as long as people are comfortable with it being put into that the account that way, I'm fine with that, because in the end we're giving them that extra money. But I said I would be probably more comfortable just putting it straight into the budget and just having it be a little clearer to the public what we are doing as far as the Board of Education budget goes. All this other stuff, we may understand it, but it's not easy for people to understand that when they look at those numbers. And so just out of a sense of clarity, I wouldn't be opposed to putting it $100,000 right into the Board of Education budget line. So that's what I have to say. But overall, I think this is great. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Councilman Jenks, did I see your hand up? And then Councilman Walsh, I saw yours.
Thanks, Dave. Actually, I think Don had his hand up first, but I'll go. Yeah, I mean, I think I think a few weeks ago we were looking at a possible increase for the Board of Ed of only $300,000 or something like that. It was a relatively low number back, a couple weeks ago. So the fact that we found another $100,000 tonight to go toward the Board of Ed is a good thing. I wish we could contribute more to their budget, but given what we're looking at this year and wanting to kind of protect ourselves next year and the following year, I think we're doing the right thing. So I agree with what we're doing here.
Thank you. Councilman Walsh?
Thank you. I didn't mind letting the veterans of the budget wars go before us, so we could see what, we see the battle scars already on all of you. So I do appreciate all the input that you have given. I'm sure Jim could say the same thing. Going through this, I followed budgets for this town for several years, thinking that, I know a lot about it, and then once you get into it, you find you don't really know as much as you do. So when I read the comments, on Facebook or wherever, I take them with a grain of salt, because I don't think everybody realizes that we're all in this for the same reason. We want to give the best product to the people in this town at the best, so that they're not paying so much that it's going to put them in debt. With what's been happening over the past 2 months, you have to remember, it's not just the residents who are with the unemployment. I know we all got an email that, Cheshire only has 5.9% unemployment rate. Okay, only 5.9%. But if you're in that 5.9%, you're having a difficult time right now. We're average around 2.5%. So it's more than double what we normally have. Businesses that have had to shut down for a month or more. Having a small business myself, I know that when you shut down your business for a month, that could put you in a deep hole, and it could take you not only months but years to recover from it. So we're watching out for the businesses. We're watching out for the residents of this town. We're watching out for everybody. I just feel that what we have done is remarkable, because the last thing we want to see is people getting laid off. And when you start looking at towns from around this state or around the country where layoffs are the only option for many towns, I think what we're doing is really great. Now, yeah, we may be asking for givebacks or pay freezes, but if that doesn't happen, we may end up having to do layoffs, and that's the last thing we want to do. But this budget cycle has been very eye-opening to me and very interesting. Um, um, and as I look at the next 4 years of what our debt is going to be climbing, and then year 5 it drops, but then the next year it jumps really high again. So I mean, we have to watch that as well. And going back to what Sylvia said when she said, somebody had said we're not forward thinking. Um, Obviously, they're not watching our meetings or looking at what we're doing, because we are forward thinking. We're thinking ahead, and that's what you have to do in this. So I suggest before you make comments, learn about what we're saying and what we're doing here, and we're trying to do our best to make sure that this town can stay the great town that it is. And it is a great town. I mean, we have a great education system, we have great services that we give to people, and we have a great spirit in this community, and I want to continue it. So having said that, I really think that what we've accomplished is a really good budget.
Thank you for your comment, Mayor Orris.
Yes, thank you, Dave. And I appreciate everybody's hard work. This really has been a long and collaborative effort. And I think at the end of the day, the result of this budget is not making any of us happy. I know the school's probably not thrilled, the town's not thrilled, taxpayers aren't thrilled. They'd probably be looking for some kind of a reduction. But nonetheless, we've really worked hard to try to balance the needs of everybody. And the only thing I would say is to where we ended up, and I just want to make sure I'm 100% clear. So we ended last meeting with because I had to walk away, but I just want to redo it again. We ended at $1,150,000 cut from the Board of Ed budget. We put on the table today to reduce that cut to $1,050,000. Seems like we have consensus to do that. The question becomes how we get there, whether we actually do it in lower increase to their budget request this year, or we reduce it there and then add it back into the COVID savings on the other side. And I'm going to say this to my esteemed colleague, Mr. Talbot, because I hold him in the highest regard. We've been through this process together for a lot of years, and I respect you immensely. You know that. And I am so happy you're at this table with the rest of us. My only reservation in doing it the way that we just ended up is that I'm concerned that the public won't understand how we're getting there, and will hold the council. Again, it's only $100,000. And Dave, I agree with you. It's a deck chair off the Titanic on a $74 million budget. But nonetheless, I want the public to understand that we worked hard. We've really tried to deliberate, and we're doing the best we can across all of the departments, the schools, the towns, and everything else. And so for me, if I really had to pick, and again, I'm not looking to die on this either, but I would rather see that extra $100,000 shown in as a higher increase to the Board of Ed budget, rather than putting it into an additional $100,000 of the COVID carryover savings. So again, I say it with all due respect to where it's coming from. I know the net result is no different. But I am a little worried about, kind of the perception of the public on it and not fully understanding what we're doing. As it is, there are additional funds already that are in this mix that I'm not sure they fully understand. And this will further exacerbate that. And I just think I'd rather keep it a little simpler at this point, so that, it's a little clearer. That's just my thoughts.
Other comments?
I'm not going to die on the hill either, Rob. I think it's for those that pay attention and listen. I think they'll understand that there's 300,000 they can use from last year. Therefore, they only got what they got this year. And when you add it all together, that's their increase, in a manner of speaking. And I, either way, I can live with it. The only question I do have, I'd like some firm clarity on.
Whoops.
Yeah. Well, All right.
I hit
Maybe
the
we'll,
ejection button.
yeah.
That was a cliffhanger.
There we go.
No,
There we go.
Mike,
Realize
right,
the
Tim?
chairman has that button. If somebody says they don't like you, hit the button. Tim just got shot into his backyard.
Well, no, it was just somebody who called me. I've had 2 calls tonight, and I guess I couldn't get that one to go off soon enough. Okay. I think it was the second stand firm call I got tonight. Anyway, I guess back to my thoughts are, I wanted some clarification as to Peter's initial conversation regarding surplus and allocating it in years forward. Peter, I was never really I didn't see the wisdom of that decision on our part, having to divide up some of that savings over 3 more years of budget cycles with debt service. I'd like to know that the council is not assigning it in apportionment over 3 years in your mind, because to me, we should have flexibility to use that whenever we feel like it.
The only thing, Tim, I said was I didn't want to use those one-time savings and put us into a bind next fiscal year. So I wanted to see the 616, which was the total amount of expense savings that Sean came up with that were one-time savings. I wanted to see those go into debt service. How we end up using it in debt service, I think, is for us to decide next year and for future councils. But I wanted to see it go in debt service with the thought that it would help do some smoothing.
And Sean had
Tim,
expressed.
I thought I had clarified that right before my alarms went off, but that we were just going to use that money in some general account so that we can have this conversation again once we have a little clearer picture of what the
Right.
budget looks like.
As long as that's abundantly clear with all, I think that's perfect, because I think that gives us more flexibility. And Sean says that's the best place to park it, because we can change our mind and do it in a smooth way. So as long as that's what's happening, I think that's good. That's clarity. That is
The
important.
biggest piece, I think, for the public to understand is that we are doing a forward look to the budget concerns we have.
Absolutely.
We're not applying all of this in year one, this current budget in front of us. As Mr. Talbot said, we've all been saying, and I know I've been saying it from day one, is that we need to accumulate some additional savings to deal with the multi-year problems we know are coming. And if we don't, we're going to have a rebound effect on the taxpayers that just is insurmountable, in my opinion. So we are all unanimously in support of passing along some of those savings from this year into the following budget. And I think we're all agreeing that it ought to sit in a flexible account for us to have this conversation again at next year's budget, and we'll determine then how best to use them.
Yeah. Sylvia?
I agree with everything you're saying, and I understand, Rob, your concern and David Belliver's concern about what it looks like to the public. I think we have to do a very diligent job to explain to these people in a way. They hear us say, well, we're going to cut this, we're going to cut that. The Board of Education is receiving $1.4 million in round figures more than they got last year, or more than what we cut, that we had decided to cut out of the proposed budget. So they are not being cut out of what they had before. We are adding to what they had, not as much as they wanted, but we're giving them the money that they have. So it's really important for us as council people to be able to explain that we're not cutting their budget, we're adding to their budget by 1.4, 1.3, and whatever it turns out to be. And I think we just have to be careful with the terminology. And I guess from my perspective, I'm really tired of having, and I guess it comes with the job, but I get tired of trying to defend to people, as Don said, who think they know the budget because they read the numbers that come out at the end on the piece of paper, and they have no conception of what we do to get to those numbers. So I think it's important that we're positive. We have increased that budget by $1.34 million, whatever the exact number is, and we are not telling the Board of Education how to spend that. They can spend it however they need to spend it. They're not telling us how to spend the town portion of that budget. So I'm perfectly okay with it either way. I do agree that we have to be careful about the perception that it looks like they're only getting 1.1 or whatever we ended up with there and not 1.3 or 4. So I think we have to be really careful to make sure that we're very clear about that in the public's eyes. But I am confident that we've done the job. And if they do their job and really read the facts, that's all we can do. So I'm good.
Here's the good news, folks. We are all in agreement as to what the net numbers should be.
Yeah,
It sounds like
imagine
we've
that.
got unanimous consensus on that issue. The only issue really up for discussion at this point is whether we want to show that extra 100 grand in the budget's increase, or we want to put it in the COVID, an additional $100,000 in this COVID carryover. You know,
Yeah.
that's really it. That's what we're boiling down to. But the net effect to the taxpayers, the school system, and everyone else is exactly the same.
Yeah. Jim, I see your hand.
Mr.
Yeah,
Jenks?
thanks, David. And the one thing I would say is that, in keeping with our theme of being
Thank you.
concerned about, where we're starting from next year, then I agree with Peter that it's probably better, obviously by a narrow margin, it's probably better to do what he's suggesting as far as putting it into the COVID savings or putting it into a separate account. Just not having it there as part of that starting number for next year. I would agree with Peter. That's probably the better way to go by a narrow margin.
Other Councilman Walsh?
Yeah, one other thing is, what we've all been concentrating on the education budget, but I mean, don't forget the town government is taking a bigger hit percentage-wise than the education side.
Yeah.
And
Zero funded.
but we don't have 400 emails coming in saying, hey, how come Public Works is not getting as much, or because obviously it's the education side, and to think that if whether we have kids in the schools or not, we don't care about them. Believe me, we all have property, and our property values are important to us, and that means the education has to be good. And I would never ever vote against something that will affect our education department, nor would I, because I know indirectly it'll affect my property value. And one other thing is, I found out today, 13% increase of people using the food pantry in the past month, 25% increase of people getting food vouchers from our human services. That's a big number there, and that means other people in this town who are hurting. So we have to remember, not everybody is in the same boat as you may be, and saying, I don't mind if I have to pay a few $100s more a year in my taxes, because not everybody's in that. And nor would the businesses go from a few $100s more to a few $1,000s more. You can't afford it. So I think, again, what we've done is I think is the best. Like Mr. Orr said, we're all going to agree to not like this, but it's something that we agreed that we're going to get done, and we will move on to the next year. I mean, hopefully this will help us with next year's budget, what we're doing this year.
Well, I have every confidence that we are asking our taxpayers to live within their means, and many of them are having to change what their priorities can be for their spending. Businesses that we have in town, many of them are changing their priorities. They're doing more with less, and we're asking our town government to do more with less. I have every confidence in the town manager to have a zero increase in his budget to still be able to provide the services, and I have every confidence in the Board of Education getting $1.4 million in spending power more next year than this year to be able to provide the services that our students expect and that we deserve as Cheshire residents for the taxes that we pay. I have every confidence in them. Other
May
questions
I
or
make a comment?
comments?
Yeah,
Sure,
I got a
I'm sorry.
comment.
Yes.
Comment, really two. One was prompted by something Don said in his first set of remarks, and it had to do with quoting a statistic from the Labor Department about Cheshire's unemployment rate. And I think, regardless of what that number was, the state of Connecticut could not process hundreds of thousands of claims. I believe they said they received more claims in 1 week than they've received in 10 years. So any number that's been bantied about Cheshire's unemployment rate is butkus. It's absolutely it doesn't even register. The other observation I would like to make, I believe I read 5 or 6 emails associated with maintaining 100% of the Board of Education's budget. Personally, I like a little more depth in a conversation with a council member. 100% of a department's request has never been an adopted budget measure. And I'm not trying to tell the public to get smarter or wiser, but that's not a fair statement to make to a hardworking bunch of volunteers who have gone line by line, pound by pound, Zoom by Zoom to take a look at this meeting. And I'm not admonishing the taxpayer or the people that think it should be 100%. But forget about it. It isn't going to happen. As to standing on the hill over whether it's last year's money or the current year's taxes, which are no increase, I'm just as comfortable telling the public, well, we've encumbered money from this year's savings to go forward in the coming year. I think it almost sounds good. But I'll vote. If I got to be a tiebreaker, I'll go whichever way I have to, as long as the number's the same. That's the end of my comments. No more fan mail for Tim Slocum.
Well, it's great that we are, I have to say, it's great that we've had hundreds of people viewing these videos. It's great that we're getting the dozens of letters and correspondence. I think that's great that throughout all of this pandemic, the public is able to find a way to communicate with us. And I think that's tremendous. I miss the days of 700 people in the auditorium at Cheshire High School for the public hearing, but this is the way we're doing life nowadays. And I think that it's great that we are hearing from the citizens. And quite frankly, I think we're answering. We found additional money. We're saying, let's spend it on education. We're hopeful that the Board of Ed is going to be able to make it work to keep the purchasing power what it is that they're hoping for, and the things that'll get saved and not spent are things that maybe are optional, that aren't directly affecting the students, that maybe some maintenance type projects and some replacement of things that aren't being as worn out because they're not being used as much because we're not in the schools for the last quarter of the year. So anyway, I sense we're circling around a bit, and I think the next order of business is to have the budget committee make a recommendation to the full council and have the town manager prepare that. Would that be correct, Mr. Orris?
Yes, I think that's certainly fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I will accept a motion from either Mr. Jenks or Mr. Slocum regarding whether we want to move the spreadsheet as adjusted by the town manager and ask him to work on those, because it takes a couple of days to get all the numbers exact for our motions for Thursday night special council meeting.
So moved.
Mr. Slocum?
He's talking.
Yeah, we can't hear you, sir. We need your words of wisdom.
Unmute. Okay. Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. That's always the case. Anyway, I'm comfortable moving the adjusted statement that Sean just did to reflect the, I believe it is the $415 increase in education and the $71,914 in general government, et cetera, for an overall increase of $1.867063. I believe those adjusted figures reflect.
Okay, so you're moving
So
that
that's
the
back.
money be
Yep.
left in the Board of Ed budget and not in the carryover budget. That the carryover be left at 200,000 and the Board of Ed be given the 100,000 directly.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Jenks, I think it's kind of awkward at the moment because Tim didn't hear it because he was trying to fix his computer.
Was Mr. Jinks prepared to make a motion? And
he was, and he put on, I believe he put on the floor the 1.137 instead of 1.237.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I guess it comes down to me then, and I would prefer the 1.237 only because I believe what Mrs. Nichols said is that it is going to be easier, and actually Councilman Veliver, it's going to be a little bit easier to explain to people. I'm not concerned about the lower base for next year. I mean, there are other towns that have actually gone backwards in their spending on education. There hasn't been the difficulty with that. I'm not concerned about the base being $100,000 different. I am concerned that the residents feel like they were listened to in a more direct way. And I think this is a more direct way, giving the $100,000 directly to them rather than putting it in the carryover and then having it that way. So I know we're in a little bit of a disagreement here, and it's a minor disagreement in the $110 million budget, but I would prefer the way that it's on the screen right now, 1,237,000 increase going to the school board. So I guess what I'll do is I'll second Tim's. I'm allowed to second. I'm just not allowed to make a motion as chairman. So I'll second Tim's motion that the budget committee recommend what's on the screen now.
Do I have to withdraw my motion or something?
It didn't get a second, so it's not a motion. And I
Okay.
don't think Tim or I are going to second it. So it's not a motion that's there. And like I said, I hope we can all be agreeable on this. It's not a big change. I just like the semantics and the I think more transparent way of showing the public that we're giving the Board of Ed as much as we possibly can to be able to do what they need to do for one of our most vital services that we offer. So I guess with that, okay, then I'll call for a vote of the Budget Committee. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 I heard 3 ayes. It passes unanimous. Mr. Chairman, Mayor Orrs, you're going to have a recommendation from the Budget Committee for Thursday night's meeting that we go as forwarded a moment ago.
Well, thank you to all the hard work from the Budget Committee. I know it's been a long process. And I think because of the gravity of this budget, I'm pleased that we've all gotten to about the same place. The fact that we're discussing how to account for $100,000, but the net result is not any different, I think is pretty good. And so either way we go, I'm fine with it. As I said earlier, hopefully now that we have the motion on the table from the Finance Committee, we could just put it to bed and go with it the way the motion is there. I would hope we'd get unanimous support because I do think it's important in this budget, and it has been a collaborative effort to get here. And I think, I'm looking forward to supporting this on Thursday night. Hopefully getting this piece behind us, moving on to the capital budget, and certainly spending some time addressing some of the other really important issues that we have to face as well in light of everything that we've been dealing with. So I look forward to Thursday night putting this to bed. Any questions or comments from members of the council or Sean? Anybody want to jump in at this point?
If I could just, if I know we were focused obviously for a good reason on the general fund budget, just a quick point of clarity so that we have the resolutions ready. We've talked about the water pollution control budget and the cuts we've made, and whether to also, I think Jim Jaska just had some questions for me this afternoon about whether we want an additional appropriation in their budget toward the debt service reserve fund, or if we wanted to just let that lapse. And again, like we've been talking about tonight, has the same effect throughout the year. But did you want to see that 100,000 that we've talked about? I just didn't want to miss it and not include it in the motions if that was the desire of the council.
You're talking about the extra $100,000?
Well, because effectively we've reduced their budget, right, by their expenditure budget by, give or take $100,000. There was discussion of keeping them sort of level funded, but using that as an additional way we would put 100,000 towards the debt service reserve fund, or the mill rate stabilization fund, as we might start calling it in the future. It's again something we can continue to work through. So I just would,
from my perspective,
want to know if we want that.
Since it is savings coming out of the WPCD, and obviously that's where we're seeing a big increase in debt service, I would have no issue if, but for everything else, you put that $100,000 into the debt service reserve account. That seems to me to be the right place to put it.
Okay.
So that'll have the effect
Members
of
the
increasing their expenditure budget by 100,000, transfer to debt service reserve, just like we are the 600,000 in the general fund.
Correct. I mean, that's, I think, what we're suggesting, unless anyone has a problem.
Yeah.
No, that's
No.
exactly what we were doing.
Okay.
All right, is that a
Right.
motion from you, Mr. Slocum, that you
Oh,
recommend
yes,
that?
yes. If it requires, yep, absolutely.
Well, we should formalize it, and then
Yeah.
Sean will work with getting the numbers ready. Is there a second to the Budget Committee's motion to recommend to the full council the reduction of the expenditures for the WPCA, but then an added line of $100,000 expense that would then go to a debt reserve?
Mr. Jenks.
Mr. James, do you want to second
Is
that, or
that
I
a-
can?
Yes, second, yes.
Okay, that's for the
didn't hear
WPCA, for the, yeah, for the water pollution control. They're still gonna have $1.4 million in their reserve fund. But it gives us a little bit of a help towards knowing that it's coming to us, and they're still keeping the sewer use charge the same. It's not going up. So
Right.
when you get that bill in January,
And remember,
it'll
to
be
the
the same.
public, next year, we've got a spike of north of $700,000 due to that plant. So, that's
Right.
one of the many reasons we're worried about that second year budget.
Yep, very good. All right, so there's a motion and a second from the Budget Committee for that. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. 3 passes unanimously. We also have the enterprise fund for the pool, and I'll accept the motion to move that get approved as presented.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Is there a second? Second. All right. Sensing you're ready to move on and not discuss anymore, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye,
Aye.
passes unanimously. Okay, good. That's it, Sean, right? Those three,
That's it. I think Jim Jascott might have one quick question
Jim, yeah, I
on
see your
Yeah,
hand up.
Board of
I just
Assessment
wanted to
Appeals.
mention, I threw one other revenue adjustment in this afternoon, and I apologize for putting that in the nth hour. But when we did the original budget, we used the before the Board of Assessment Appeals list numbers. And as a result of the Board of Assessment Appeals going through their process, we picked up about $13,000 because the grand list was actually more favorable than I was projecting, because we put an estimate in when we do the original budget a couple months back. So, Sean, I think your spreadsheet was off by that 13,000 that I threw in there, but adjusted the reduction to the fund balance. If you look at the revenue sheet, I think, yeah, you see, as a result of I think the heart and hypertension fund adjustment, you were going to use 134,697 less of fund balance, so that's a good thing. We might actually, I think, be able to increase that by that 13,342 to balance the spreadsheet you have on the front side there.
Excellent.
Okay, so I'll get that fixed up for tomorrow, and there may actually be a little bit of rounding as a result when you do the final mill rate calculation. And I don't expect it to be more than, say, $10,000, but I think I could also add that to the fund balance because I think it's going to be a favorable rounding adjustment.
I think at this point,
okay.
the fund balance is the delta to use for these minor adjustments in the $110 million budget.
Unless Jim finds any more of those with a lot of extra zeros.
Yeah, that'd be great, right?
Zeros,
Mr.
I'll
Talbot?
certainly
Absolutely. All right. Chairman Orris, I'll hand the meeting back over to you. I think our work is done here.
Thank you, Mr. Barwi. And I know we have executive session as a possibility. There's nothing new that I've been told from Chairman Perugini at the Board of Ed. He did mention that Mr. Stone should have some updated retirement numbers by the end of the week. But other than that, nothing new to report. Ms. Talbot, I know that you probably have some public communications that have come into us. How do you want to handle those?
We had the several that were sent to you today, and there was one additional one that's come in, and I can read their names and try to summarize if you would like, or I can read them.
Yeah, I would appreciate it if you can get some of the thoughts on the record.
Sure. Okay. And I apologize in advance to anyone that when I've mispronounced your name. I'm sorry. Michael Rapetsky wrote in concern for potential budget cuts that may be brought up tonight. He is against any kind of budget cut to the school system. Well-funded school system is important to our community, and it's what makes our town so desirable. Please consider what is at stake here and don't take away from future students. Mary Burnham writes that she knows we are experiencing difficult times. As an older retired resident, I am very aware of how people are affected, but I believe strongly it's time to support our education system. Schools will need our support now more than ever. Many students will need to catch up. I know you have a difficult job and there's a goal to keep the budget at 0 increase, but in my opinion, education is not the place to cut. John Bester writes that he is asking the council to support the education budget as presented because of so many unknowns. This is not the time to interrupt or stifle the efforts of our teachers as they face unprecedented difficulties. It is more likely that our schools will need additional finances and resources rather than less. We rely on the council to support our schools, which supports the values of our home and well-earned reputation. Your task is not an easy one and may require putting aside short-term expenditures in order to preserve our long-term commitment to the education of future generations. Christopher Affey writes, I'm writing to urge the council to fund the Cheshire Public Schools budget in the full requested amount of $75,502,544. Now is not the time to force the BOE to make drastic cuts to programs and services. Additional money will be needed to be spent for cleaning, safety, bus routes, perhaps additional staff, and we must think about the emotional needs of the students and their support. I am disturbed that the teachers union has been asked to forego their raises. They are the reason that learning distance went better than expected. Many Cheshire teachers are also Cheshire taxpayers, and we are helping our own citizens. I ask that all council members support this request. John Bestor wrote again, please don't cut to the education budget. Jennifer Bates writes, I am writing in support of funding the full budget amount that has been recommended by the Board of Education. Decreasing the amount is not the right course of action. Teachers, staff, and administration need support from you in order to succeed. Right now is not the time to back away. It is the time to lean in and help push them forward. Fully funding the budget is not only beneficial to students, impacts the entire town. I understand that finances are uncertain, and I understand how important balance is. However, filling the education budget must be a priority. Allison Ranchado is writing to the council regarding the council's proposed budget cut. As a special ed teacher at Highland, I can only imagine the negative impact this could have on our Cheshire students, and in my case, the most vulnerable population. Now is not the time to cut funding. When school resumes, our children will need more than ever. Now is not the time to cut teachers and increase class sizes. Please take this into consideration. Heather Cavallaro Bargout moved to Cheshire 10 years ago solely because of the schools as we planned a family. I have a 7-year-old at Norton and a kindergartner starting in August. Shocked that we are even considering budget cuts. I expected to see an increase to ensure kids can make up for lost time, additionally safe measures, and ensuring we invest in our futures. Teachers at Norton are amazing. I'm saddened that we can't to hear of the budget cuts. Please do not cut the budgets. We should be decreasing class sizes and increasing budgets. Krista Hayes writes about travel, increasing fees and faculty rental fees. This is a little different. Can someone please address Mr. Golick's comments that were made in the Cheshire Herald this past week, particularly related to increasing fields and facility rental fees? Also, is the town actually renting fields and facilities to other towns? There always seems to be a shortage for Cheshire teams, so I hope this is not the case. Cheshire teams should come first. I do believe that Mr. Golick clarified that the fees that were discussed were for out of town, not for our local fees, and clarified that with Ms. Hayes. And the last one we've received, you did not, council did not receive, we received it after I sent you the last batch. It is from Fiona Pearson. And she writes to strongly urge the council to fund the Board of Education fund for 76,330,052 that was initially recommended. The reduction is disconcerting given these unprecedented times. We have no idea what schooling will look like in the fall, but forecasts tell us they will not be inexpensive if we need to invest in new technologies and do accommodating for social distancing and increased cleanliness. I am proud of our community for providing meals to our students during this time of crisis, proud of our teachers, and we can also talk about home values and other economic metrics. And this is no time to force our Board of Ed and Superintendent to be forcing cuts in our schools. Thank you for considering my request. And there are no additional emails that we have received.
Thank you, Ms.
Or
Talbot.
phone.
Did you call on me? Did you acknowledge me, Rob? I
Yes,
didn't hear you.
I did, Ms. Nichols,
Good,
yes.
good. Well, I would like to say I got an email and it came to some other council members. I don't know how many, but it was just before the meeting, and I would like to be the voice that is different from the letters that were read. So I'd like to be able to read this one as well. This one is from Kate O'Donnell, who is an educator, lives in Cheshire, and her letter says, I know you will receive many emails from parents about the proposed cut to the BOE budget that will raise concerns about larger class sizes and cut programs. I am a lifelong educator and understand that the cut you're voting on is not extreme and will not result in a poor educational system in Cheshire. With reconfiguration of some priorities and a little belt tightening, I'm certain Cheshire's education will not be as negatively impacted as some fear. Just as in the district where I have worked for 26 years, there are many ways to absorb cuts that do not directly impact students. This is a difficult time economically for everyone, and I wanted to let you know that I applaud your fiscal responsibility in this budget decision. I hope you vote in favor of this budget cut. So that's the other side of the story.
Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Other council members, Mr. Veliver?
There we go. Thank you. And Sylvia, I appreciate you sharing that email as well. But I also want to let the people who are watching know that although these letters are being read at the end of the meeting after we've sort of already had these discussions, I would like to just stress to everyone that council members have received, with the exception of the last email that was just read in, which we did actually receive separately, but all those emails that Arnett had read, we've all received them during the course of the day, and we've all had an opportunity to read them. So if anyone thinks, oh, great, they're reading my letter after they've already made their decision, I just want the people to know that we did receive those emails. They were sent to us as they came in. They were forwarded to all the council members. So we have had an opportunity to see them and read them and take them into consideration as we've made our decisions tonight. So thank you to all residents who took the time to send those emails and those correspondence in. It's very enlightening for us to hear what you have to say, and it's important for us to take those into consideration. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Veliver. I was going to mention that exact fact, and I know many of us did receive a lot of these before tonight's meeting, and many of us have responded to those emails directly. I know I tried to respond to everyone except for the one that came in late tonight, which I would do later. But that one came in after we started our meeting. So we are certainly listening to the public. We have been listening throughout this entire budget process. I can tell you that we recognize the value of all of the departments of this community, not just the school system, but all the services that are provided on the town side. We respect and value all of our employees, and we have done a really good job, as Mr. Walsh has suggested, of doing our best to avoid future layoffs. Our hope is to preserve service and preserve our employees. And I know I've personally been getting a little bit of flack because I've been one of the few people bringing up the conversation on potential labor concessions. I'm sorry, but as I said in one email, I won't apologize for bringing it up. We're all sacrificing to some extent. And I don't think it's inappropriate to assume that labor would play a part, not the whole thing, would play a part in this process to ensure that we continue to provide the services and maintain the level of employees that we currently have without any significant layoffs, and probably no layoffs to permanent full-time employees. So when the public sector or the private sector is seeing people working harder for less, taking 10% pay cuts and more, we have unemployment nationally that's approaching 20%. I do not believe the 5% number that was put out there. As a matter of fact, the state of Connecticut actually issued a statement when they publicized that said it is absolutely inaccurate because the information hasn't been able to be compiled fast enough. So we really don't know what our local unemployment is. I suspect from people I've talked to, it's a lot higher than that. So we've made tough decisions. We've done it what we believe in the best interest of everybody. It's not to attack any particular group or to stand with another particular group. It's what we've all done with our vote as a council member to do what we think best serves this community. And that's what I'll be doing on Thursday night. I will be using my vote to support what we've put on the table. And I know some people are unhappy with it. I'm sorry that's the case. There are many people unhappy with this budget. It's just the facts of the times and the unprecedented times we live in today. So it is what it is, folks. We've done our best. We have all worked hard. I don't want to belabor our conversation, but I can tell you this. We have been working tirelessly on these meetings as a group to get through every bit of this budget. This is not a rubber stamp. It would be so easy for us to rubber stamp a budget that comes across the street or that our town manager provides to us. No, we don't do that. We go through every line item to make sure that we're doing what the electorate asks us to do, to be fiscally prudent and do what we believe is in their best interest. And I can tell you with all my heart that this group of 8 of us, including all the staff that has sat at this table, has done that job to the best of our ability. And at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't like the result, we have an election coming up in a year and a half. And that's your opportunity to decide whether you like the direction that we all are bringing this town or not. And but until then, this council has the ability to make decisions, and we're doing it as we see fit and in the best interest of the town. So thank you all for watching. Is there anything else? I do have one other announcement, but I do want to turn it over to any other council members on budget conversation. If someone would like to add a statement of any sort. I know we'll probably be doing this again on Thursday.
Right.
Okay. I do have one announcement though. We did have a passing of Karen Smith, who passed away last week, and she was a town council member, as I'm told, from 1987 to 1989. She was an elected school board member from 1979 to 1987. Her last 4 years as chairman. She served the town well. Her husband served as an appointed volunteer official on one of our boards. I believe it might have been the Water Pollution Control Authority. I'm not 100% positive. But once again, a family that gave back to this community to a great extent. And we want to just make sure, on behalf of the town council and our entire town, that we pass our condolences on to Karen's family, wish them our best and our condolences, and certainly our thoughts and prayers are with them. So yes, Ms. Nichols.
I think we should not close the meeting without at least referencing the fact that we all had a Memorial Day weekend, and I would like to let everybody know that the John White and the Veterans Council did do the wreath laying ceremony on the green on Monday afternoon. I was honored to be able to speak on behalf of the town. It has been taped by our good old friend Henry Carson, and so it will be shown tomorrow, Wednesday, I believe. Peter, you maybe have some better information about that than I, on channel 15 sometime Wednesday, and to my knowledge, I don't know what time that is.
Henry
Henry
Chase.
Chase.
Yeah,
I'm
Henry-
sorry.
Henry, our
Carson.
poor
Right.
former parade
You're
marshal,
correct.
Henry.
I apologize.
and Carson's
Right.
Be giving the video to us. It's a question of how that's going to be delivered.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but it coming soon. Let's put it that way.
But I think we as the council would agree that the weekend that we just had was a different weekend. We didn't have the ability to have a parade and honor all those people who'd lost their lives in service of the country. But we all did take some time, I hope, this weekend to think about that and realize that as we sacrificed our freedoms to be able to go out and distance, not socially, that was a minor thing compared to some that people gave for our country. So I just didn't want the meeting to go by without at least acknowledging all of those families that have lost someone that in service for the country, and thank them for sharing their family members with us. So that's all.
Sylvia, thank you for bringing that up, and I certainly want to thank you for representing all of us over the weekend at the semi-public function that we were able to hold. It was not a big function, but nonetheless, Mr. White does a good job of choreographing something to certainly honor those that gave their lives for our freedoms.
It was a bit of a challenge, Rob, but we were honored to have Mr. Rowland there, who will be soon celebrating his 100th birthday. So he came out of quarantine to be one of the veteran representatives there. And it was a little bit tricky to do all the technological planning, but we just wanted to make sure that people knew that that was done. So.
Well, thank you for delivering that message on behalf of the entire council. And I also want to recognize Mr. Jinks had also passed along the request to have a moment of silence to recognize all of those that did lose their lives in an effort to preserve all the freedoms that we enjoy today. So thank you, Mr. Jinks, for bringing that up as well. This would probably be the appropriate time to have that moment of silence and to remember all of those that gave the greatest sacrifice for all of our benefit. Okay, thank you. And thank you to Mr. Jinks for bringing that up, and Ms. Nichols for serving this weekend on behalf of the full town council. Mr. Kimball, is there anything, or you, Mr. Jascott, would like to add or talk about at this point before we finalize the paperwork for Thursday's vote?
I should be all set.
As long as Jim has what he needs, then we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is
Thank
there
you all.
any further comments or questions or anything from members of the council before we adjourn?
Just thank you for a nice short meeting.
It wasn't mine, it was Dave. Dave, good job.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank
It wasn't that short, Dave.
My alarm going off might have added to it, but anyway, my apologies for that disturbance. And with that, if I see no other questions or comments, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved
Calvin,
or
thank you.
seconded.
Mr. Veliver, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously. Good night to everyone. Thank you all for your comments, your thoughts, and for watching tonight, and we'll see you again on Thursday. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.